Press reports have said that the White House sees strong indications that Iran violated UN Security Council resolutions with the ballistic missile test over the weekend. Yet White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said it wouldn't affect implementation of the nuclear deal with Iran. This is altogether separate from the nuclear agreement. Iran has demonstrated a track record of abiding by the commitments that they made in the context of the nuclear talks, end quote. This is factually inaccurate and a troubling response from the White House. The president promised that the deal with Iran would only be about nuclear issues and then conceded sunset provisions on ballistic and conventional weapons in the nuclear agreement. To now say that it is a separate issue asks facts to take a back seat to the president's foreign policy legacy. As for the track record of Iran abiding by its nuclear commitments in the past, there were many violations which seems to have eluded Mr. Earnest's memory. Mark Dubowitz, executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, testified at a hearing of the Senate in the Banking Committee in January 2015. He said that Iran had not frozen its nuclear program and engaged in testing of advanced centrifuges, announced the construction of 2 new nuclear reactors, and illicitly procured parts of its nuclear program, among other violations ignored by the administration. Some track record of abiding by its commitments. Is there anything that Iran could do that would cause this administration to impose consequences for violations of the agreement? But much more importantly, since the current JCPOA agreement was signed in July 2015, Iran has violated many current sanctions with no American or international consequences. So what has Iran done since the signing of the agreement in July, which the administration has chosen to ignore? 1. It bulldozed the Partian complex, erasing military dimensions of their nuclear program. 2. The Al-Quds Force commander Soleimani defied a UN travel ban over the summer, meeting with Russian dictator Putin to arrange for the delivery of the S-300 missiles, helped introduce Russian forces into Syria, and set the stage for a new intelligence agreement that brought Iraq into the Iranian-Russian orbit. 3. Iran unveiled a new generation ballistic missile in addition to the unauthorized tests this past week. And finally, 4. President Rouhani said, "We will sell and buy weapons whenever and wherever we find it necessary. We will not wait for permission from anyone or any resolution." So on to the current situation going on in Israel today. It is beyond appalling to read daily news accounts of the organized knife and terror attacks against Israelis with a sick moral equivalence. This has even infected the Wall Street Journal news division, where they said, quote, "Israel deployed hundreds more soldiers to quell a wave of violence among Israelis and Palestinians." A wave of violence, as if terror spontaneously erupted with equal culpability? Other mainstream outlets were worse. NBC News headline, "Violence rages between Israeli and Palestinians." CBS News, "Palestinians, 2 teens shot, killed by Israeli troops." BBC, "Violence rages between Israelis and Palestinians." The British Guardian, "Palestinians killed, Israelis stabbed in another day of violence." And the British Sky News, "Jerusalem attacks kill 3. And from down under, the Australian, "Jerusalem bus and car attacks leave dead and wounded." Back in Britain, the Independent, "Guns, cars, and knives are the new weapons of war in Jerusalem." And this doesn't even mention the historical revisionism of the New York Times taking up the Palestinian claim that a Jewish presence on the Temple Mount is in question. So much of the blame for the current wave of Palestinian Arab terrorism is related to the false charge and the false claim that Israel is changing the status quo on the Temple Mount. Left-wing journalist Gershom Baskin, who is co-chair of the Israel-Palestinian Creative Regional Initiatives, felt compelled to set the record straight, writing an article entitled, quote, "There is no real threat to Al-Aqsa." In the days prior to the Second Intifada that began in 2000, campaigns were being waged by the Islamic movement, the Northern Branch, to protect Al-Aqsa. Then as now, there was no real threat to Al-Aqsa. The issue of Jewish presence and prayer there is not a religious issue. According to Sharia Islamic law, there was no prohibition against Jewish prayer on Al-Aqsa. More than one Palestinian Muslim official told Baskin that from the point of view of Islam, there is no problem with Jews or others being on the Temple Mount. The problem, he said, is that it was political. The real problem is the extremists on the Muslim side who were prepared to use violence to prevent the Jews from praying there. End quote. So who is siding with the extremists? Israeli Arab Knesset members and President Abbas, who fanned the flames of incitement. You wouldn't know it from reading the New York Times, but in the early Muslim period from the 7th to 11th century, Arabs called Jerusalem the Temple Mount Bat el-Maqdis, an Arabic transliteration of Beit HaMikdash, which means the Jewish word meaning temple. Even a tourist guide of the Jew-hating Supreme Muslim Council in 1924 said that regarding the Temple Mount, quote, "This site is amongst the oldest in the world, beyond any doubt, where King Solomon's temple once stood," end quote. The problem is that denying Jewish history is the basic tenet of the Palestinian narrative and their nationalism. To prove the point, in December 2000, Israeli Foreign Minister Shlomo Ben Ami, from the left, agreed to abandon sovereignty over the Temple Mount, provided that the Palestinians recognize the site's holiness to the Jewish people. The proposal was utterly rejected by the Palestinian leadership, which included current President Abbas, who refused then, as now, to recognize any connection between the Jews and the Temple Mount. As for why you shouldn't expect any sympathy for Israel in Europe, even when innocent Jews are attacked simply for being Jewish, in Germany today, polls show that between 40 and 60% of Germans compare Israel's actions regarding the Palestinians to the Nazis' treatment of the Jews. Finally, remember the supposed new outreach to Israel by the Obama administration after the bruising battle on the Iran deal? Well, it seems that the Obama administration told UN Ambassador Samantha Power to boycott Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the UN. You may have noticed she wasn't there back in September.